This video discusses events within the game's story for educational and analytical purposes. The first time I played Resident Evil Village, I was absolutely blown away by the artistic merit of the project. The level design and the locale alone took me back to my early 90s childhood memories, to the days when our immediate families were still building our cottage houses in the middle of a remote village in Minsk. Some of the village homes were indeed generational relics of a Slavic-born architecture of the 1900s, and I found it uncannily accurate how it's been depicted within the game. It's funny to think that a horror game, of all things, would invoke pleasant childhood memories, but I stand to reason that this simply outlines the raw talent of the art team responsible for Resident Evil Village. Nevertheless, when you've played for a while and the high-fidelity fatigue has settled in, you start to realize that aesthetics alone cannot carry the game all the way to the finish line. Since the bar for quality has been set with the initial impressions, you come to expect this level of quality to be maintained throughout the rest of the game, and thus start paying attention to other aspects. This is where, depending on the merit and competency of everyone involved, little disappointments and shortcomings can creep in and soil your impression. And in this game, there's no worse culprit to demonstrate this principle other than the game's story script. This is a trend of bad writing that is very prevalent in the games industry. And today, we're gonna take a look at a number of issues with the story of Resident Evil Village. It seems to be a common trend in the video game industry to completely ignore classical story writing principles. Most commonly, the excuse that games happen to be a different medium meant to be experienced differently. It is baffling how many AAA multi-billion-dollar projects are guilty of putting the bare minimum work into the development of their characters. Once you lift the veil of Resident Evil Village's phenomenal artistic achievement, you find that the core story, which is the main driving force of the game's tale, has a dramatic depth of a puddle, plagued by the shallow, incomplete, or downright lazy ideas. And there's no clearer example of that other than the game's very own introductory fairy tale. You see, fairy tales are not something that any overambitious writer can splat together over a weekend. Fairy tales are an embodiment of hundreds, sometimes thousands of decades in wisdom. These are messages passed from generation to generation, a culmination of accumulated morals and values by these generations, meant to be taught and passed on to the younglings, to keep the community from falling apart. Our classical fairy tales were born in villages, communities, tribes of closely interconnected people. They exist to effectively teach the little ones what it means to have humanity and cultivate a set of morals that will keep the future of the community strong and morally brought up. In film, the use of a fairy tale is used to lay down the thematic exposition, which the rest of the story will be based upon. It is a tool that sets up what the movie is about. It has very specific purpose in the telling of the story. Thus, it is important that the fairy tale carries within itself a moral and a lesson that the viewer can learn from. Let's take a look at an example of a fairy tale with a strong moral lesson. A classic Slavic fairy tale, Swan Geese. Once upon a time, there was a peasant couple who had a daughter and a son. On a cloudy day, the couple had left for the market and left their daughter in charge of her younger brother. The daughter, having lost track of her responsibilities in a time of play, has forgotten to watch over her little brother. Her negligence had left her little brother unattended, which had attracted the sight of a flock of mythical swan geese, who fast approaching had snatched him and carried him away. The daughter, realizing the mistake, had set out to chase after him in hopes of bringing him back. During her journey, she had come upon a personified magical oven, with a demeanor of a kindly grandmother. The oven had asked for help, to have its fire lit and iron cast lid put into place. The daughter chose to help and did as she's been told, tending to the fire within, and soon found herself well on her way with a set of freshly baked rye buns for the road. Then the daughter had come across a weary apple tree, personified as a loving mother, whose ripe and plentiful fruit were weighing her down by the weary branches. The tree asked for help, to be shaken so that the apples fell and the burden of the fruit would be lifted, to let the tree rise out of the shade and bask in the sunlight once more. The daughter did so and found herself well on her trail to her brother with a bunch of apples for the road. Finally, the daughter came across a river, too personified as the other encounters have been. The river asked to be free from the bundle of large rocks blocking the stream. Once again, the daughter decided to help by moving the rocks with difficulty, allowing the river to freely flow down the stream. She was offered to quench her thirst and found herself well on her way towards the little hut, which was standing tall on a towering hen's leg. Glancing through the window, she had found her brother inside, and immediately knew that the hut belonged to the witch known as Baba Yaga. Whilst inside, a mouse scurried out and pleaded with the daughter, asking to be given some porridge from the hut's stove. The daughter did so, and the mouse had told her about Baba Yaga's intention to steam her and her brother alive so that she may eat them. The girl took her brother's arm and fled into the woods. The witch, having found her hut emptied of her meal, had sent the Swan Geese to pursue the children. While running through the forest, the daughter had come upon the river, the very same river she had helped to free on her journey here. The river, in repayment for her kindness, helped them and shielded them from the passing flock's sight. When she ran on, the Swan Geese followed again, and when coming upon the apple tree, which she had helped to unburden, the tree had offered to help and concealed them from the flock's sight once more. One final time, the kids made a run for the edge of the woods, and the flock was found once more hot on their trail. They came upon the oven, who had offered to hide them within its still warm ash chamber. The flock, angry and persistent, had seen them climb into the oven and then proceeded to themselves fly into it, only to end up in its fiery core instead. Having been defeated, the Swan Geese had fled their doom, and the children reached their home safe and sound. The moral of this fairy tale is simple: do good, and good will be done unto you. It teaches you the moral of showing compassion and helping those in need. And, as a result, those who do help will likewise be helped in turn. It's a lesson about humility. A film which should use this fairy tale as an exposition, an ideological exposition, would also be a film that builds upon that same idea. With that said, let's take a look at the fairy tale which Resident Evil Village uses as its thematic exposition.
Long ago, a young girl went with her mother to pick berries for her father, who was hard at work. But the forest greeted them with a dark, cold silence, the bushes empty. Yet determined to find the berries, the rascal broke free from Mother's grasp and vanished into the trees. Mother's worried cries faded fast as the girl ran on, over vine and under branch, and into the forest deep. Feeling strange eyes upon her, the girl recalled Mother's scary bedtime tales, and her throat became bone dry. Then the Bat Lord appeared. He greeted her warmly and bit his own wing. "Come, child, quench your thirst," he said. So she drank the thick, dark blood and smiled with joy. Passing through the graveyard, menacing storm clouds loomed, and the air turned bitingly cold. The girl was shivering in her thin clothes. Then a dark weaver appeared, and with a click of his fingers crafted mist into a beautiful dress. "Come, child, warm yourself," he coaxed. So she clothed herself and smiled with joy. Across waters deep and ominous she went, hoping a boat she found would carry her home. But hunger's grip tightened and her heart grew heavy. Then the Fish King appeared and offered one of his many fins. "Come, child, eat your fill." So the girl ate and smiled with joy once more. Continuing on, she soon entered the forest's dark heart. Then an iron steed appeared, bearing a beautiful golden gear. The creature said nothing as the girl approached and snatched what she thought was another gift. The horse grew angry and summoned the other monsters. Terror filled the girl's heart as the wild wind rose around the beasts. Suddenly, a witch appeared, dark yet regal.
"Gifts we gave, but more you took," she snarled, "so more in turn is due." In a blink, the girl was trapped inside a mirror. Her parents, though, had searched all day and at last arrived. With rampant rage, father fought the witch, while mother's loving touch shattered the dark enchantment. But the witch was strong, and father yelled, "Save our daughter!" So mother bore their child to safety as the forest was consumed. Even now, the burnt forest is a grim reminder of father's sacrifice. To this day, any child who stares too long into the charred wasteland will be haunted by nightmares of getting lost while picking berries.
Artistically and compositionally speaking, this is a beautifully arranged start to the adventure of the protagonist. It's well animated, brilliantly stylized, and choreographed. There's really not much to complain about there, since it's a beautiful work of art. But that doesn't change the fact that from a storytelling perspective, you never create something like this just for artistic points. Within a story, this must have a purpose. When a story starts with a fairy tale, its purpose is to lay down the theme, which the rest of the story will be building up on. What is the moral of this fairy tale? The girl gets lost in the woods because she didn't listen to her mother. Is this a story about respecting the authority of your superiors? The girl is granted gifts all throughout the story, teaching the child to expect gifts with not even as little as the exchange of kindness. Instead, she is immediately punished when the fourth spirit appears, and she does exactly what she has been conditioned to expect. Is the moral not to overstate your welcome, or not to overreach? At no point in the story is the girl given an opportunity to learn from her mistake. She is simply punished, but then immediately ceases to be the main protagonist of the tale, since immediately after, the father and mother swoop back into picture, unbonding the child from the need to even learn a lesson. A fairy tale in the beginning of a story must set the theme of the story. What is the theme here? Is it that the consequence of your actions will be handled by someone else? The girl certainly doesn't learn anything. As far as the fairy tales had foretold, the first three lords had offered the girl their blood and flesh to keep her alive. Is the moral of the story to reject the kindness of others when they sacrifice a piece of themselves? Is it to exercise self-moderation? Is it that you should be morally limited to taking only what is given to you? If that is so, the rest of the game had absolutely nothing to do with this moral. Within the fairy tale, the child was not yet taught the supposed importance of such a message. So why is the writer expecting them to pass the moral test when the fourth spirit appears? This fairy tale is communicating that children must know undeclared rules, otherwise they will be punished. In a fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel by Brothers Grimm, the children stumble upon a gingerbread house and make a moral decision to start consuming it without permission. A decision made by the heroes for which they had paid dearly in a lesson that followed. In Resident Evil fairy tales, however, the lesson is rooted in the provocation betting on the child's inability to control themselves. Why would the same three lords who had selflessly helped her be furious with her when she takes what she has been conditioned to take? Is it simply because the four lords were not really four lords, but actually a witch? Aside from being a plot convenience, that doesn't hold much moral weight. In that case, what is the moral of the story? Certainly, while playing the game, none of the themes we've taken a look at above ever get explored in any shape or form. When the reading of the fairy tale is done, the viewer still doesn't know what the theme of the story they're about to embark on is. And thus, all we get is no more than a spooky shooter with the player mindlessly wandering the tight turns, driven with nothing more than a parent's instinct of preservation. At a glance, it is a noble cause, but it's not the theme. It is but the scaffolding upon which the writer is supposed to build their presentation of a theme. In Swan Geese, every encounter with a mythical creature, the oven, the tree, the river, the main character is tested for a choice of morality. Will the daughter ignore the creatures, leaving them to their own devices, or will she offer her help? Dramatically speaking, it is a test to see if the daughter is worthy of saving later herself. In a Resident Evil fairy tale, there was no moral to learn from, no lesson to teach the children. The end of a fairy tale, revealed post-credits of the game, the father swoops in and sacrifices himself in battle with the witch, while the mother releases the child from the cuffs of her captors and flees to safety. It is a beautifully produced fairy tale sequence that makes an attempt at a deep meaning where there is none. And thus, we're left with a fairy tale without a moral, which perfectly summarizes a story without a theme. If a scene has no meaning, it should not be there in the first place. Presently, it is merely there to retell the story of the game. Nothing new is offered, and thus it brings no value other than artistic brownie points. Some players might be content with it, being impressed with the artistic presentation alone, but that doesn't change the fact that it could have been something much greater, of more value, and add richness to the story, making it that much more satisfying. It is a missed opportunity. What the writer should have done was tap into the world of myths and legends and found a real fairy tale that supports their theme. But to do that, they have to address the fact that the story has no theme. If there's no theme, then what is your story about? What are you writing about? If the story was attempted to communicate that family is the most important value, then nothing in the fairy tale had set that up. If the main idea of the story is that family is the most important thing in the world, then the fairy tale should have been about the father, not a daughter walking around accepting gifts from mythical spirits. This video is a small sample of a series of analytical discussions and observations between my father and I, as we explore the peaks and valleys of the film and game industry's most prominent releases, for the purpose of identifying most common trends of good and bad storytelling. This analysis is used in the development of a comprehensive tool bag of writers' tools we call Siren, a web-based workbench project that serves to provide effective tools for focusing a writer's thought process towards creating deep, detailed, adequately thought out, and meaningful stories. This is done with the help of analysis of decades worth of award-winning cinematography wisdom. With my father's background in film and mine in games, we explore the many renowned releases in both industries in order to make the story writing tools equally useful in creating stories for film and games alike. If you are interested in writing deep and meaningful stories, regardless if it's film, video games, or more, click the link in the description or the pinned comment and sign up to our mailing list. You will get notified when the tool becomes open to the public, as well as get notifications of any creative writing training videos. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more film and video game analysis videos.